The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka has forged itself a unique place in military history as one of the most fearsome weapons ever. Conceived as an answer to the problem of delivering an unguided bomb onto a target with accuracy, the Stuka was designed from the outset to be able to dive extremely steeply at high speed to give a bomb enough momentum to be catapulted onto a target that would otherwise be extremely difficult to hit using conventional bomber tactics. There were many dive bombers employed in the Second World War, some of which were converted from types originally designed for other roles. But it was the Stuka, with its distinctive, almost vulture-like shape, that came to epitomize the type. Stukas were employed in almost every theater of war between the Allies and Nazi Germany, and when the Luftwaffe had air superiority, it was an awesomely effective weapon, destroying ships, bridges, and tanks with unnerving accuracy. Recognizing the fear the aircraft instilled in the Allies, the Germans sought to capitalize on it, installing sirens known as Jericho trumpets to the wings, giving the Stuka its distinctive howl. Even if the unfortunate souls on the ground survived the attack, many were left shell-shocked and forever heard that terrible noise in their nightmares. However, as the Luftwaffe lost control of the air to the numerically superior Allies, the Stuka was one of the first aircraft to suffer the German Air Force's reversal of fortune. It was slow, under-armored, and under-armed when compared to the new generation of Allied fighters and warplanes. But while the aircraft's design had a number of weaknesses the Allies could exploit, the Stuka did have one advantage on its side: its force of highly skilled, dedicated pilots. This is the story of one such pilot who blazed himself an incredible combat career in the defense of fascism, which he so passionately believed in. This is the story of Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the Stuka Ace who destroyed over 500 tanks during his wartime career. Welcome to Wars of the World. It could be said, perhaps somewhat cynically, that Hans-Ulrich Rudel was destined to make a career diving towards Earth. Growing up in a small village in southern Prussia, at aged 8 years old, he leapt from a second-story window with nothing more than an umbrella to slow his fall, believing it would act like a parachute. Of course, it didn't, and instead turned inside out, leaving 8-year-old Hans crashing down into a flowerbed below, breaking his ankle. The son of a Lutheran pastor, the young Rudel found he was not as gifted as some of his classmates when it came to academia. However, in practical subjects, and in particular sports, he was exceptional. As such, with his more promising sister receiving the lion's share of the family funds, Hans-Ulrich Rudel found himself having to act largely independently to do the things he wished, creating an enormous sense of self-determination that stayed with him throughout his life. Typical of this mentality was the fact that at age 10, he went into the mountains after heavy snowfall and taught himself how to ski, the outdoors holding a special place in his heart thereafter. Unfortunately for him, not even this self-determination was enough to allow him to realize his dream of eventually becoming a pilot, given the expense involved, and so he fell back on his sporting prowess and became a fitness instructor. By now, Hitler and the Nazi Party were firmly established in power, and with the announcement that Germany was creating a new air force, the Luftwaffe, he saw his chance to finally take to the air as a fighter pilot, enrolling in 1936. He was often left ostracized by his fellow classmates, since rather than join in with the late-night drinking sessions and parties, he preferred to remain sober, having a taste for milk, and engaging in a strict, disciplined lifestyle, a result of his Lutheran upbringing. Instead of the sleek, agile, and fast Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter he had hoped for, Rudel found himself flying reconnaissance and aerial photography types in an Observer when Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, While a critical mission, Rudel never appreciated it, and sought to instead find a way to get stuck in with the fighting, be it either in a fighter or a bomber. Serving with a training unit in 1940 spared him from both the successes and the bloodbaths of the battles for France and Britain, and after petitioning to join a combat unit in early 1941, he began undertaking training to join the dive bomber force centered around the Junkers Ju-87. Even after completing his training, however, he still found himself relegated to more training and second-line duties, even as Germany invaded the Balkans and Greece, much to his frustration. However, fate was about to deal him a new hand to play, and he would be given the opportunity to demonstrate to the world his prowess as a Stuka pilot. Unlike the German army or navy, the Luftwaffe was very much a creation of the Nazis, coming to power in 1933, and as such its ranks were often filled with committed fascists, of which Hans-Ulrich Rudel was one. As such, he, like many Nazis, believed that Germany had no choice but to destroy communism in order to achieve Germany's destiny, and that meant war with the Soviet Union. Given the scale of Operation Barbarossa, every available pilot was needed for combat operations, and so Rudel was finally given the chance to enter combat in support of Hitler, whom he idolized. Striking from occupied Poland on June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa proved to be a target-rich environment for the Stuka units, as they bombed and strafed roads and railway bridges. Almost anything was fair game, and with such demand being placed on their services, Stuka pilots such as Rudel often found themselves being called upon to fly repeated missions up to 19 hours a day during any daylight that was available. The Stuka was very much a weapon intended to support the army, rather than as a general-purpose ground attack aircraft. At a time when fighters were flying between 350 and 400 miles an hour, the Stuka plodded along at around 250, depending on its war load, which often comprised of a single 551-pound bomb under the fuselage and 4 smaller bombs under the wings. Stuka pilots like Rudel spotted targets through a floor window, then rolled their aircraft completely around into a dive, sometimes as steep as 90 degrees. During the dive, the previously sluggish Stuka would accelerate exponentially, leading the designers to incorporate underwing dive brakes that extended automatically, controlling the dive speed to just over 350 miles per hour, buying the pilot time to line up his attack. After releasing his weapons, the pilot and his single gunner in the rear cockpit would experience punishing G-forces as they were pulled out of the high-speed dive. It was very early in Rudel's war that he would make a name for himself. By September of 1941, German troops were encroaching on Leningrad when they started to come under heavy bombardment from one of the few battleships in the Red Navy, the Murat, operating in the Leningrad Canal. Rudel was among a number of pilots dispatched to silence the 24,000-ton battleship's guns, catching the Murat on September 16th. During the attack, Rudel and another Stuka made an extremely steep dive onto the Russian ship, dropping 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs. The other Stuka narrowly missed the target, but Rudel's bomb scored a direct hit, causing immense damage to the battleship. Rudel initially believed he had sunk the ship, but days later he learned the vessel had survived the attack and was reportedly furious that he had been denied this victory. On September 23, 1941, as his unit attacked the Soviet Navy in harbor, he spotted the battleship sat at its moorings and decided to have another go. Despite a hail of anti-aircraft fire from the harbor, he and another Stuka made their approach and then entered into a 90-degree dive. Rudel released his weapons at less than 1,000 feet before pulling out, leveling off some 10 feet above the water. The punishing G-forces caused both Rudel and his gunner, Alfred Scharnowski, to briefly black out, before Scharnowski witnessed the spectacular sight of the battleship exploding as it sustained a hit on its magazine, igniting the ammunition for its main guns. The ensuing blast heaved the turret up, knocked the superstructure and forward funnel over to starboard, and demolished the forward part of the hull, claiming 326 men's lives. In the ongoing war in the East, Rudel's skills seemed matched only by his commitment to fighting the war. taking off whenever he could to rain down death on the Soviet army. But as 1941 ground to an end, German fortunes had changed as dramatically as the Soviet weather. Thick snow ground their advance eastward to a halt, and like many pilots in the Luftwaffe, Rudel found himself grounded, waiting for aircraft to be de-iced and for fuel to arrive from the overstretched and severely hampered supply chain. When he could fly, he now operated with a new gunner in the form of Erwin Henschel, who would stay with him for the next 2.5 years, and both of them and their fellow Stuka flyers ended 1941 having to fend off repeated attacks on their airfield from fresh Siberian troops used to the harsh climate. After going on leave in early 1942, during which he returned to his hometown to get married, Rudel was reassigned to a training unit in Graz, Austria, where it was hoped he could instill upon his trainees the same skills he had demonstrated. It was also at this time he was being recognized for his accomplishments and received the Knight's Cross. However, the increasingly tenuous situation on the Eastern Front saw him volunteer his training unit to support the thrust into the Caucasus region that eventually led to the Battle of Stalingrad. Once again, he displayed extraordinary skill and dedication, completing his 500th operational mission in September 1942. Within 5 months, that figure had doubled to over 1,000, as he and his Stuka pilots used their extraordinary accuracy to strike at Red troops in Stalingrad, often only a few hundred meters from German positions. By 1943, Soviet industry had ramped up production of its tanks, such as the superlative T-34, requiring the Luftwaffe to become ever more proficient at killing them from the air. To that end, Rudel was briefly taken off the front line to participate in tests of the Ju-87, armed with 37mm anti-tank guns. Returning to the Eastern Front with the new Stukas, Rudel and his men proved devastatingly effective at dispatching tanks during the Battle of Kursk in 1943, which would see the largest tank battle in history. On the first day alone, Rudel knocked out 12 Soviet tanks, flying in to attack at treetop height, where the Stuka was difficult to spot and enjoyed remarkable accuracy with the new guns. Highlighting his proficiency as a tank killer, on November 25, 1943, he was sent to meet Hitler personally at the Wolf's Lair headquarters, where the Führer awarded him swords for his Knight's Cross, after he had destroyed his 100th Soviet tank. The following March, his unit was operating north of Odessa when one of the more inexperienced pilots found themselves under attack by Soviet fighters. Panicked, he flew off behind Soviet lines to escape them, and so Rudel went after him, finding the Stuka, which had come down in a field, but its crew were alive and waving at him. He therefore attempted to land nearby in an effort to pick them up, but unfortunately for him, the ground proved so soft that his aircraft became stuck, and now both he and Henschel were trapped behind enemy lines as well. The 4 Stuka crewmen attempted to make their way to German lines on the opposite side of the Dniester River, but in the attempt, they lost sight of Henschel, who eventually drowned in the attempt. The remaining 3 then pressed on, but came across a party of Russian soldiers armed with submachine guns, who demanded their surrender. The other 2 flyers put their arms up, but Rudel didn't fancy spending any time in a Soviet POW camp, and made a run for it, being hit in the shoulder by enemy fire as he fled. He managed to walk a further 30 miles before reaching German lines, much to the elation of his men. The incident only further cemented Rudel as a hero of Nazi Germany, and more rewards were bestowed upon him. Fearing the damage to morale should he be killed, Hitler ordered that he stop flying operational missions, but after Rudel's pleas to the contrary, the Führer rescinded the order. However, the one caveat was that he was never again to attempt to land and pick up downed Luftwaffe pilots. Rudel therefore returned to operational flying, but by now, the war in the sky had swung in favor of the Allies, with even the skies over Germany swarming with Allied fighters and bombers. The Stukas, which had once delivered such fear, were now sitting ducks to Mustangs, Spitfires, and Yak-9 fighters, and Rudel was finding it increasingly difficult to conduct any operations in defense of the dying Third Reich. In one hair-raising instance, his flight of 19 Stukas were pounced on by over 100 P-51 Mustangs, and it was only Rudel's leadership that saved them from being annihilated. Rudel was shot down along with his new gunner over Latvia when his aircraft emerged from thick fog over a Soviet armoured column. He nevertheless escaped yet again, and within hours was leading an attack on that very same column. Later, he was wounded again after inspecting a destroyed tank he didn't recognize, its crew having survived and opening up on his aircraft with an anti-aircraft gun, striking him in the leg. He managed to fly back to base and passed out from the pain before he could get out of his seat. It was as 1944 drew to a close that he began trading in his Stuka for brief stints flying ground attack-oriented versions of the Focke-Wulf 190, an aircraft more capable of defending itself. However, he continued to do much of his work in the Stuka. He was, by now, the tank-killing ace, having knocked out well over 400, and again, Hitler asked him to stop flying, and again, he refused. On January 1st, 1945, Hitler awarded him the unique golden oak leaves with swords and diamonds to his Knight's Cross, making him one of the most highly decorated men in the Third Reich. But not even Rudel's extraordinary exploits could help Germany's situation, as the Allies were now squeezing it to death from every direction. On February 8th, 1945, Rudel led an attack against a group of 13 Soviet tanks just 50 miles from Berlin. His group had destroyed all but one of them, and as he finished the last one off, he felt searing pain in his right foot as bullets tore through his fuselage, wounding him yet again. After landing, he was taken to a hospital where doctors had no choice but to amputate his leg below the knee. But incredibly, not even this stopped him from flying, and beginning on March 25th, he returned to combat operations, destroying some 26 more tanks before the Reich finally fell, but not before he met Hitler one last time in Berlin to wish the Führer a happy birthday. Like many high-profile Nazis after the fall of Hitler's Germany, Rudel felt it preferable to surrender to the Western Allies. Surrendering to US forces near Prague, the Soviets demanded he be handed over to them for trial, but the Americans refused. As is often the case with many Nazi aces, there is some dispute over his final tally, but there can be little doubt that he did as much as anyone humanly could in support of the Third Reich's war. He is generally credited with flying 2,530 ground attack missions, destroying more than 800 vehicles of various types, as well as 519 tanks, 70 landing craft and barges, and of course, one battleship. The war may have been over, but for Rudel, the cause of fascism was still just, and he fled to South America, where he wrote of his exploits and supported the growing neo-Nazi movement in the West. He remained a contentious figure in German society until his death on December 18, 1982, aged 66. While many admired his exploits and courage, they were always overshadowed by his unwavering support for the Nazi movement. And there you have the tale of the greatest Stuka Ace, who destroyed over 500 tanks. Please leave a comment down below with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.